Hello, reasonable vegan.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
I'm sorry if I
got
freeze.
my coffee here.
My camera keeps doing this stuff. I don't know how to fix it.
Yeah. I'm recording on OBS from my end to upload it. So if that slows it down, I can turn that off as well.
No, it's always on my side. I haven't figured it out. I got a new PC. Everyone swore by it. And the camera just keeps slowing down, like doing slow motion stuff. And
Gotcha.
And I don't know how to fix it.
Gotcha. But yeah, when we were talking earlier and you were responding to me in chat, you had a couple different thoughts about why I would find it acceptable to eat an animal, like when you're starving versus not. I think that would be an interesting route to go, but you can just ask me whatever questions you have.
Sure. I mean, are you a vegan advocate, or you just you live a vegan life, or do you argue against carnism, or where are you?
Yeah. So I am obsessed with moral philosophy and philosophy in general. So I like having conversations about moral philosophy, including veganism. Most of my advocacy is online. I have a channel. I just had a debate with Vegan Gains and anyways. So yes, I in the same sense that I like to talk to and push ideas about maybe abortion or circumcision or any of these legal issues. I feel the same way about moral issues, and yeah.
So what did you debate Gains on?
So the main element of the debate was on the proper way to be a vegan advocate. And if because I've made videos talking about how like Joey Carbstrong is a bit too extreme, and I think he pushes people away, and Vegan Gains thinks that you should be very extreme, and so I don't think so. The main thing I wanted to challenge him on was this thing that I call the apple steak challenge, where I talk about crop deaths, which I'm a vegan that likes to look at all the different angles and not just push away arguments that I think are bad. Mm-hmm. And so when I've learned from kind of a friend of mine, JD Garland Farms, mm-hmm. about rodenticides, I came up with this example that if you had a plate full of chopped up apples and a plate with a steak from a cow, and if we could know for sure scientifically that the apples cause 3 times the amount of suffering to rats or any other animals to get the apples than the suffering to get to the steak, which one's the more vegan option and which one's the more moral option? And in my opinion, and half the vegans I talk to, eating the steak would be the vegan option and the more moral option. Vegan Gains failed
I bet
that
people
test.
don't like you. I bet people aren't liking you very much in that community.
They have a hard time with it. Carnism Debunked, the guy that you just talked about, mm-hmm. I did a talk with him and I gave him the challenge, and he actually said that it was a very good point and he didn't know where exactly he stood. But I'd say half the vegans say they would eat the apples on principle. Vegan Gains said that the rats lose their rights and support from humans because they were violating our rights by just stealing our property.
Yeah,
which I think is a silly argument, and I want to challenge him further on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I debated Vegan Games, he accepted bear jail, basically. You know, that we ought to intervene eventually. To be consistent, you do put a bear in jail for violating the rights of the salmon.
Gotcha. Yeah, I used to be more on that Vegan Gains side on the topic, but I'm leaning more the other direction now, and I could be convinced either way. But yeah, I think if you were in a tree and you had a sniper rifle and a lion was about to eat a zebra, the lion can't make this choice. It's not intentionally causing suffering. It's just doing what it naturally is supposed to do. But the zebra is also doing what it's naturally supposed to do. So if I don't do anything and the lion makes the zebra suffer, is that worse than if I shoot the lion and it dies quickly? I personally don't have any care about lions or zebras. I do care about suffering. So in a sense, I would want to kill the lion.
You would shoot. Wouldn't you shoot the zebra? Quick, short death.
Fair point. I would rather shoot the zebra, given the idea that let's hope the lion won't break a tooth on the bullet. I'd rather shoot a zebra than let the zebra suffer to death. And then it's a similar thing with shooting the lion. Either way is fine by me, but it would come down to, am I messing with the ecosystem? Because I care more about myself than any animal or other human. I care more about my loved ones than any animal or other humans. And then I care more about humans than other animals. And so if doing something like this messes with the ecosystem and therefore messes with humans, I'm not in favor of it. But if I could magically make all lions disappear, and let's say it wasn't going to mess with anything, there's only one reason I'm against that. And my new reason that I'm against that is, again, I care about myself and other humans more than other animals. So if humans were like lions and were carnivores and could not survive on any other animal or on any other products like plants, then I would eat the shit out of every animal out there. I mean, if me and you were on an island, I would kill you in a heartbeat to survive. And so if I had to eat only meat, I would want to eat meat, and I wouldn't want any superior being to kill me because I'm causing any harm. So to put that on the lion, I feel like it's not fair. So that's why I stand against that position currently.
Right, but then that would just open up everyone else's preference to do what they want. And so long as they were consistent with their actions, with their preferences, then you'd kind of accept it, not based on your preferences, but generally the paradigm would be, because what I find interesting, and I always try to pull a vegan here, is like, why, so why do you need X, right? So I say, the vegan usually says, well, you don't need meat. And I go, well, for what? Need for what? And like you said, to live, right? So my next question to always the vegan is, why do you need to live? And the answer is, I want to. I don't actually need to. So then it goes to wants, right? And so if the basis for the position is a want, you basically grant everyone else's want, and we're back to the starting position of the argument, which is how do we...
Well, I disagree. I mean, I agree with a handful of what you just said, but everything has to be based on our wants. I mean, we can't really base off much else than our wants. But so here's a quick breakdown of why I think laws should exist and we should have a society at all. Is when we're in nature, everything's survival of the fittest. There's no natural rights. We can just kill each other or not. So the most intelligent thing we can do, which does not involve morals at all, is humans create a society that has a government, a prison, and laws. And so we want protection from the government so we don't feel constant threat in nature. So if we have laws saying you can't kill people, you can't punch people, you can't harm people in any way, and if you do so, you go to jail. Now, this is based off our want, our natural want to survive, our natural want to not be harmed. And then this is the best benefit I can possibly imagine. And then anything past that would just be laws based off morals.
Well, I disagree. I don't think you can construct government structures, justice systems, and things like that without assuming some meta-ethical position. If it was just wants, then any system, any organized society could, in fact, just construct a system that just wants to sacrifice certain kinds of people, right?
Yeah,
and that's just
that's what the Aztecs did. They sacrificed about 12,000 a year. So, which is why I think that any desirable society with a good government would base it off mutual benefit. Everybody involved would have to benefit. You don't kill me, I don't kill you. You don't punch me, I don't punch you. And I think that's what we.
What if the benefit? What if there's a bigger benefit for one party to supersede the mutual benefit?
Can you explain a little further?
So if I'm one group and you're another group and we're like the chiefs and we meet for coffee and you're like, dude, JimBob, what about mutual benefit? And I'm like, yeah, that's an interesting concept. But I looked at the numbers and it turns out that based on your assets, if I get rid of all the men, take all the women and children and all the huts and all the weapons and all the farms and the foods and the animal, it's probably better. It's more in my favor to just use will to power.
Yeah, correct. Okay, so if we're in nature and we don't have a big society yet with laws and rules, if I have a group of people and you have a group of people, and let's say you have some slaves and they're helping you out, and you have a whole bunch of food and all this stuff, it might not be if you don't feel any threat, then it wouldn't be more beneficial for someone like you in nature to join the society that gives protection for all. You'd only want to join it when you don't have protection, and if you're willing to take the risk, then you are. So this mutual benefit would really just come down to the idea of everybody being involved, not wanting to have a looming threat.
Well, I mean, let's just say it was neither. What if your tribe, right? I assessed your tribe, and you were not really a threat or an advantage. That it didn't matter. It wasn't either or. It was just that I wanted what you had.
Yeah, you want to. Yeah. So, and that's the reason why you'd want to form a society. If I was part of a tribe, let's say we had like 1,000 people, and you had 1,000 people, and you could just want what I want, you could take it. I mean, we're in nature; it doesn't matter. Nature does not care about us. If we got a group together that said, "This is our land. Here's the borders," then we could say, okay, we create this prison, and if you'd have to have a military, of course. If people try to come in and get you, then luckily you got power in numbers. If you get 5 tribes of 1,000 together, you got 5,000. If everybody agrees to this mutual benefit, and then your tribe of 1,000 hopefully wouldn't be able to come in and take us.
Yeah, but you said, that's what you said is. Well, that's why you would just want to create a society. I'm saying I already have a society. We already did that part. We said let's get together, men, right? And instead of being a nomad, let's get together. Establish our ground, put our feet in the ground, right? Establish something, make some customs, make some laws, make an identity, a cultural identity, and now the mutual what you're defining as the mutual benefit of the men inside my new colony, right? Yeah, is to take over other places. That's the mutual benefit within the society that I've already constructed. So so there's like the methodology I'm not ignoring. I'm saying that you can still use that, but only within your own society. And I'm saying it's not automatically better in the utilitarian sense to just make friends with the neighboring tribe every time
100%
based on
if
arbitrary
by tribe,
goals, right?
Yeah, if by tribe you mean separate societies, yes, completely. And that essentially your tribe would be like a member of nature. So if you have 2 people out in nature and they nobody has control over the other, and they could fight if they want to. Same thing happens where if you have a tribe of 1,000 and I have a tribe of 1,000, we have our own societies where we create our laws. The society itself could fight off the other society, and again, nature doesn't care. I agree.
Right, and it could be beneficial, more beneficial to fight for one group than it would be to maintain some sort of diplomatic
if it
understanding.
Right. If it wasn't needed for survival, depending on the details, I would consider it immoral personally. But yeah, for sure.
Right. So there's always an example of where mutual like whatever mutual benefit is, there's always an example that can be placed forward that demonstrates rejecting the mutual benefit route is actually more benefit to just take the personal benefit.
The mutual benefit I'm referring to is mutual benefit amongst humans within the tribe.
Yeah. Mutual benefit in one tribe. It's not necessarily mutually beneficial between the tribes to then merge or have some sort of relationship. It might be. I'm not saying it's not possible in a lot of cases. If they had something that you didn't, and you did, like, that's how kind of bartering happens. You do a barter instead of a fight. Hand-to-hand combat, and then suddenly you have more resources. But there's always, I think if we're honest, especially in the nature is metal paradigm, that there's always a looming chance that the one who has a better military at some point might just take what you have, because maybe they're just done with it, or maybe their leader just became an egomaniac, right? And just the failure and the brokenness of man itself on a spiritual level could result in some carnage anyway. But again, to relate it back to veganism, So you reject will to power, right?
Can you just describe that a little further?
Just like humans acting like animals. So you reject will to power for man, but you accept it for animals. So you don't intervene on the animal. You did give an example of where you might, but that's still a human-centric value. It's not about it's not like the lion was happy or the zebra was happy. You intervene. It was like, he saved my life. Like there's no it's not a human.
It comes down to capability. So in my mind, like anything that is immoral, like okay. So let's say we had a society. We're in a. Are you in the U.S.?
Yes.
Okay. So we're in the U.S. If we could magically know that we did not need meat to survive in any way, we just can consume it, but we magically knew we did not need it, then I would say that the immoral act of harming the animals to eat them just for taste pleasure, 100% taste pleasure. I'm not saying that is the case, just hypothetically. Then I would call that reasonable to have it illegal to do so in our society, just in this hypothetical. But that's because we are able to reason and to recognize we're causing this harm here. This is not needed. We're aware this is only taste pleasure. And then that is what it is. But to take an animal that cannot reason and to think that there's some level of forcing it to do what we want it to do in nature, I as of now, I would find that absurd. If there was an alien species that came down that's very similar to humans, or even not similar, but we could communicate with them and they were reasonable, and they wanted the same amount of numbers of them came to live in the U.S. with us, and we said, yeah, you can be part of our country. We would expect them also to reason the way we do and abide by our laws that might be based on morals, because they can reason, but animals cannot. So I don't hold animals to the same standards.
Right.
But I would shoot the hell out of one that was trying to kill me.
Right. Now, would you shoot the hell? You would shoot one that was trying to kill you, of course, and then, and do you think that murder applies to animals, like our friend George?
Well, it depends on definitions. I'm very into definitions. Murder means that it is illegal, so you cannot murder something that's not illegal.
Right, and it's unjustified killing. So killing isn't equal murder, but all murder involves killing. And so, the murder is also distinct person to person. So when we say legal, we are kind of talking about a person acting against themselves or another person in a justice lens, right? We're talking about justice, basically. That means this is the distinction I think you'd agree with as well, is that humans can craft justice systems. Why? Because we can expect reciprocal behavior. So the only reason a justice system works is that it's laid out on the line. Even if you're unknowledgeable of the exact punishment, that if you do something illegal and it was illegal, whether you knew it or not, there might be consequences. So humans also have this amazing ability to have a sense of past, present, and future. They have an identity. They have an understanding of other people, the external world, the way it operates. There are customs and things that they walk into and either reject or apply. And it seems that trying to use a justice lexicon for animals is actually doing a terrible disservice, I think, to veganism. Yeah. So people like George trying to smuggle in these terms is actually, it's either stupid or purposefully deceptive or both. And I don't, for vegans, I think it's an embarrassment, because people who are serious about terms and concepts and things like this, like yourself, we're going to see it a mile away. Oh, you just redefined X, right? Okay, so I reject your definition, and I can prove that the definition as we apply it to humans is the dominant used definition of murder, that there's a process of justice. You don't send if you want to be consistent, you do advocate for bear jail if you accept that animals can murder each other and we can murder animals. You got to skip to bear jail. It's unfortunate.
I don't think you have to be consistent if you leave them out of your society. So and now it's tough because in the U.S. you can have this nature where there's these mountain lions, these deers, these bears. They're part of your society in the sense that they live within your borders. But if I think we should do a better job of keeping deer from being able to get hit by cars. So because they can't consent to understanding our cars. And but then aside from having areas where we can go hiking, which is great, I think nature should be left to nature. So it's not. I think the reason we don't have to hold bears accountable is because we can view it as, since they can't be reasoned with, we leave them up to them and us up to us. But
we also kind of don't, because we do intervene with animals. So we don't. We try to leave them to their thing. But if they mess with us, we don't. And so, but also, did you say that the deer can't consent to the getting hit by the car?
Yeah, I mean, the wording doesn't really matter necessarily, but my point was that, like, the reason we don't let, like, cats and dogs cats go out of the house, but, like, dogs out of the house is because we create these roads and these cars, which are great. They're great inventions. But because of a less intelligent being that can just get hit by our cars, we shouldn't be causing this harm. So I just think it would be better if we did a better job of preventing wild animals from not realizing they're stumbling out into the street to get hit by us if there's no benefit from them getting hit by us. Although at the same time, I'm perfectly fine with eating roadkill. If it's
right, yeah, roadkill's fine. Well, the reason I asked about consent is I wanted to ask if you think animals can consent.
No, yes and no, not really. So I don't think humans should have ever had ownership of animals. I don't think we should have ever bred dogs to be domesticated. And the closest thing I can think of what I think is acceptable with having dogs not domesticated, but thought of as a companion would be if you had you built a cabin out in nature and you had a doorway but no actual door, and some wild dog that was not going to eat your face off came up to you and played with you, and it came in your house and you just thought it was a cool companion, but it could leave at any point. I think that in a sense it's consenting to do whatever it wants to do because it's never closed in. But no, I mean, like, the only consent that they can do is anything that they are not being forced to not do. If a cow walks over top of a bowl and shoots its milk into the bowl, it's consenting to let that milk go in that bowl. But I don't think they can consent outside of their own actions just existing without force.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would reject animal consent. I think animals do. And you can train them to apparently agree to things, but it requires a training program, and it looks like something's happening. But the reason I asked is because if you did, I don't know why you would say we ought not or we shouldn't have domesticated dogs if you showed that it was mutually beneficial for humans and the dogs to be domesticated. Is it a better life for a dog to be in the home, being fed, taken care of, pet, and all these things, as opposed to being a wild dog in a pack, not only trying to survive within its own pack, but survive on its own if it wasn't in a pack, scrounging around and potentially being killed not just by humans or cars or machinery, but by other predators anyway. It seems that if you did take the mutual beneficial approach to humans, so I'm not sure what is your reasoning why we shouldn't have done that with dogs.
Yeah, so there's no way to know for sure that they are accepting of what we are calling better. So I do agree with you in a sense. So I think wild animals, anywhere from 0.001 to 5% of wild animals make it to adulthood. Almost all animals die horrible deaths, and nature's scary. And so yes, having a wolf of sorts or a dog and having it get fed all the time and a good owner and all this stuff, it's going to live a longer life than it would have in nature. So we can claim that much, but we can't claim anything past that. We can't claim that it wouldn't rather take that risk of being one of the 5% and it just has this complete freedom. It's hard to know.
I have a question with that example. Why does that apply differently to my 1-year-old? I make a choice based on my 1-year-old's situation or whatever it was for any one of our kids, and it doesn't doesn't consent, and it doesn't agree or evaluate even what I'm calling what's better for them, right?
Yeah.
Being healthy or something like that. Now,
Yeah.
you would take an approach. I don't know if you have kids, but that you intervene, right? You just intervene, and
100%.
right. And so you do make a distinction. I'm interested. I'm always interested with vegans where they make the distinction between, is it a human category in the animal, or is it like what you said? It's just your personal wants. It's not about being a human as a collective, as being a particular kind of being. It's about you just care about your kids, right? So you would intervene and help them. But I think you would do that with another kid that wasn't your own, right?
Yes, but it's more complicated. So when I was talking about the mutual benefit in a society, I'm not referring to children, because we have to recognize that children can't take care of themselves. They're within our species, and we have them, and that's why we have to have neglect laws. The neglect laws are complicated. If you were dying on the street and to save your life, I had to pluck out a beard hair, I don't think I should be forced to. I mean, I'm mostly libertarian. I think we should be free to do whatever we want to do. But if we have children and those children are with us and we don't put them up for adoption, then if I set it down and it starves to death, that's why we have neglect laws exist. So we have to pick a time that we reasonably think is when a child becomes an adult, and then at that point they control themselves. Before then, we control them in every way that doesn't cause physical harm. It gets a little complicated with the physical harm, but yeah, so I think that must be reasonable, and so it's slightly complicated, but they're kind of like, we own them. They're an extension of us, and I can't think of any other way. With animals, it's yeah. I can't remember exactly what your question was, but does that answer my stance a little bit?
That's fine. I was just trying to get to why not apply that to humans, and you're saying, well, you could just kick the dog out and it might live or it might not, but certainly it's more animalistic in its impulses to find food than maybe a baby would. There would be more likelihood of a baby dying alone than like a pup, or even like a...
Fair enough, yeah. If a human female gave birth to a puppy somehow in accident, I'd say maybe we have to take care of it until it reaches adulthood and then put it out in nature or something.
It sounds honestly, a reasonable vegan. It sounds like, based on everything I've derived from your view, that you're not well fit for vegan advocacy, honestly.
I get told that all the time. Many vegans tell me I'm not truly vegan, but I do not think we need to eat animals. I do not think I haven't been convinced of that anyways. And so I haven't consumed animals in 8 years, and I've been philosophically vegan for about 20 years.
What is it? I mean, the term vegan has changed pretty drastically. Vegan used to be about your diet. It would add to, avoiding some sort of harm and mistreatment of animals. But now it's changed to something else where I've heard someone say it's not even about your actions. It's about your intent in your head, and that you're aware of like animal cruelty and things like this. And I couldn't actually pinpoint today the proper term for vegan, because even vegans are sort of self-detonating, because they're swiftly changing the definitions to fit whatever their activism is, seems to be a problem.
Yeah, so I would say that most vegans, or at least the loudest ones, the definition is something like this: they aim to go against all exploitation of animals, and that must also include what you consume and what you wear. Would not be harming them. And it has to be a combination. If you just happen to not consume animals or wear their products, but you have no care about them, if you have no moral consideration for them, then I think most vegans would say you're not vegan, you're just accidentally an actionable vegan, which that is what it is. I mean, I mostly don't care about that. Now, I view veganism slightly different, and I've been working on a definition that I want to put out in the world, where I view it as a philosophy completely, only a philosophy, and it's up to the individual. And it seeks to extend moral consideration to non-human animals. And there's a couple other caveats in there, but essentially what it means is, if you don't think a cow or a dog should be punched in the face for no reason, then you are a vegan. That is the philosophy you subscribe to. If you happen to have been born lacking the ability to have empathy for a non-human animal, then it's not your fault. Somebody is just born that way, but they do not subscribe to the philosophy of veganism. So I extend veganism to many people I know that consume animals, even though I don't.
Doesn't the punching in the face for no reason at all kind of beg the question that there's this established metric for what a good reason is and a bad reason? What if someone just wants to?
Yeah, exactly. So if somebody just derives pleasure from it, punches a cow in the face, and gets pleasure from it, now I'm sure you could consider it somewhat reasonable to be accepting of that. But I don't think. I think at very least you subscribe to veganism if you see and can recognize the suffering from the cow. If it is making it obvious, if the cow is whimpering, or if let's say you stab a cow just for fun in somewhere that's not going to kill it, and you see the blood come out and it's whimpering and whining or whatever, if you recognize that as something that you're detecting emotion, then in my mind that means you subscribe to veganism.
Okay, so you can recode someone. Let's say you could recode the chemical experience of that experience. Like, so if you rerouted whether it was for the person stabbing or the animal, if you change the experience itself, pleasure to pain, or you cut off the pain receptors and nothing was happening at all, there was no whimpering, there wasn't even a conscious subjective experience of the stabbing taking place at all, but the person doing the act was gaining a really well-needed shot of dopamines that day because they suffer from depression or something, right? Some crazy scenario. Aren't we just measuring what we're calling, a good experience versus a bad one, and putting a value judgment on it, and then also assuming that cows and these other animals have experiences and subjective experiences and values of their own experience the way a human values, and kind of we humans are interesting because we experience, but then we also view our own experience while it's happening. Yeah. So we have like this meta analysis of it, whereas I think vegans fail a lot of times that there's this assumption of an experience that's akin to the human experience. And I always ask a vegan, especially when I debate them, how do you determine in an animal versus a human, how do you determine input-output? So reaction to stimuli, strict reaction to stimuli, even if it's whimpering, by the way. How do you determine the difference between just reaction to stimuli and conscious, meaningful experience, evaluating, judging, I don't like this, right? And I don't think a vegan can answer that. Could you?
Yeah. I'm going to try to answer that in everything you just asked, but I want to point out something that you just reminded me of. Earlier, you talked about a close-up of an eye and eyelashes to get emotions going, and I agree with you. That's it's idiotic. I don't mean idiotic. George, if you're watching this, Karn isn't debunked. I actually really enjoy that guy, but it's a cheap trick. And here's the thing. People get very devastated by the idea of the baby chicks going in the blender. Have you seen that? The grinder thing? More devastated than other things because we go, day one, it's just born, it's a baby, it's ground up. And then we look at all these other things. So with pigs, because of them getting crammed into cages, we have to cut out their teeth and their tails. In my mind, something like that is obviously worse than grinding up. They're dead in seconds. I would grind up a billion baby chicks if it meant I could cause less suffering to animals that receive suffering over time. So I just wanted to point out the idea of appealing to emotions instead of logical reason is I just hate it. Now, to answer your question, which I just made myself forget.
It was you used the term suffering, so the question is still there, is that how do you determine input to and stimuli, right? Input from stimuli and reaction to stimuli. How do you make the jump between that to conscious, a subjective experience that evaluates itself and makes like I don't like this or
right.
this concept.
This is a
of
fair
suffering.
point. This is a fair point, and if I don't get to a part about fish, remind me to say something about fish in a second. But okay, so I'm not a scientist. I haven't read enough studies to explain to you exactly why scientists would make the declarations they have that certain animals are sentient, therefore, because of their brain and their central nervous system, they can suffer and feel pain. But I can look at something and I can assume, and then I can leave it up to the professionals to explain their knowledge of it. So if I didn't have any information from scientists, if I was around thousands of years ago, then I would just have to look at, like, there might be some kind of an animal, like maybe an animal in the ocean or something that doesn't have blood, and therefore it not making any noise or there not being blood, I might naturally assume that it has no connection to feelings like we have. And even though back then, and not being a scientist, I wouldn't be able to detect what a mammal is or isn't, if I see something that has a face, it has eyes, if it gets kicked, it like makes a noise, runs away. If it gets knifed through it, there's blood, and it's acting how I would act, and it's acting how I've seen humans act.
You mean hold on a second. Begging the question, you mean reacting?
Which part?
You're saying acting. I'm going to correct you and say, would you accept reacting as a better?
Yeah, it's reacting to what happened to it, and it is acting in general. Reacting is probably a better word. Good call. That I would just assume I wouldn't want. If I saw another human reacting to a knife, I would want to assume that they are feeling the same thing I would feel when I got knifed. And so I extend that to anything that's coming across to me like it is. Now,
is there anything about the human that it gives you a better reason to assume that? Any extra is there any extra information you have access to that you would make such an assumption?
If I was able to communicate with them, there would be that. If I wasn't, then it would just be that it's closer to like me. If it was 100% Neanderthal or Homo habilis, I'd be like, okay, you're more like me than the chimp or the bonobo. And so I'm guessing that you are feeling this more like me than maybe this other animal. But it seems to me most mammals, it's coming across the same way. And then the added element of scientists being able to use the scientific methods to study these things and to declare this, it just adds that much more. But if I can assume by seeing a fish dangling on a hook that it looks like it's suffering, right? And so I go, oh, this is probably not good. But if scientists look, and here's an interesting thing about fish. Now, the general consensus is that they can feel pain now, but the part of the brain that humans and mammals, the part of the brain that detects suffering, that detects the ability to feel pain, a fish actually doesn't have that part of the brain. It's pretty interesting.
Hold on a second. I don't want you to run too far with this, because the thing that's in question is the conflation of suffering and pain. There's times I've been in pain where I'm not suffering. And so pain assumes reactivity, just reactivity. So a pain is a signal, right?
Yeah.
So if we all have pain signals, let's say there's animals that don't or have less or have more exaggerated pain signals. Okay. I think suffering, and this is what I'm trying to ask, is that suffering, if there's an example of someone feeling pain and not suffering, they're just feeling pain. If anyone who's done like, I'm past this stage in my life, but I've done like extensive, intense 10-day meditation where you actually overcome and just witness pain. And you don't suffer from the pain. You just witness it. You observe it. It's just input and response to stimuli. Now, that is different than suffering. And so when you say, I see a fish, moving on the hook, I don't see suffering. I couldn't assume suffering, but I could assume reaction to stimuli. That's trying to be get free from something. It's snagged. It's doing what it normally does. There's something that's not quite matching up to what it normally does, so it's just reacting and flipping and flopping around. In fact, if it was in water, it would look like it was still swimming.
For sure.
Yeah.
Which is why if the general consensus from scientists were that fish don't feel pain, they're just reacting to not being able to be where they want to be, then I, in a big way, would not care.
Right, and I would actually point out another example where if you saw a human and you were even told in advance that this human over in the corner, like let's say you had sort of like this guy, creepy guy next to you, he's like, you see that guy in the corner, he doesn't really feel any pain, and you're like, oh, that's kind of a shame actually, because there are people born without the ability to feel pain, and they suffer coincidentally. Isn't that interesting that they actually suffer and they don't feel pain? If the
like emotionally
guy,
suffer,
yeah, they're aware that they don't feel pain, and what happens is they hurt themselves. Quote. They damage their body, and they don't know they're damaging their body. They get burns. You know, it's not. They don't live a functional life because they don't feel pain. So pain ends up being this aid to our navigation of the external world. But in this example of the guy next to you going, dude, reasonably vegan, that guy doesn't feel pain over there, and you're like, oh, that's bizarre. I heard of that. And he goes over and starts stabbing him. Now, I'll just ask, do you still get a reaction that he's violating something that's not identical to causing pain?
Yeah. I mean, in the sense of how I talked about the mutual benefit, I don't think we should cause any unwanted physical touch at all.
What if he can't? No. What if he just doesn't? The guy over there can't feel anything. No touch. He doesn't even know the guy's stabbing him.
So he's blind essentially. He can't feel anything. And the guy's stabbing him. And there's no downside to it. I would still say that that as a society we should extend that protection.
Is it dignity?
But as a personal moral aspect, I mean, if this helps any, somebody asked me recently if your grandma died of natural causes and somebody ate her, would it be immoral? And I don't think so. That's not how I extend morals. So if you're looking at dignity in that sense, like I don't see any problem with doing something that means nothing, essentially.
So you would not stop the person to say, don't do that.
I mean, in the magical hypothetical where the stabbing doesn't lead them to bleeding out and dying or anything like that, where what they're doing is essentially not even happening. It's just happening in the sense that we can see this hologram looking thing. I would need to know exactly what it's causing as far as the knowledge to the person.
But if they don't feel and they don't suffer, why would dying matter? Why is
if they
dying
don't feel and they don't suffer?
Yeah, why would you draw the line at dying then?
Oh, dying. Well, I draw the line at dying for humans because of mutual benefit. If the person does not care if they die, is that part of it?
Well, you don't know. Just based on the pain.
I would afford them that those rights that the rest of the humans in my society have, unless I knew. Now, I could answer it differently if I knew that they didn't care.
Hold on, but wouldn't you afford them the fact that they didn't know what was happening to them? Wouldn't you stop the guy from stabbing him because you were just going to grant the guy in the chair who can't feel anything the opportunity to know what was happening to him?
Yeah, so I don't think people should be able to harm each other. So if the stabbing in the hypothetical, which the hypothetical seems so extreme that nothing was really happening, I view the stabbing as once you pull the knife out, they're all healed up again, like it never happened. It's very tough to go off of. I don't know. I don't think that you should be able to cause any physical harm to somebody, even if they don't recognize it. Now, it does change when you factor in the element of if they have any want for a future or various different things.
So in this hypothetical, the guy, and there are people who are crazy enough to do this, who are a little demented. If you were to witness this, and it just happened to be the case that you were surprised the guy wasn't reacting. It was an old guy who was not reacting to a younger person stabbing him, but not like full submerged knife, like little pokes, right? Or you got the sense of like, wow, the guy is not reacting. Now, I have a hard time believing that you would witness that and go, well, it's not bothering him, and the knife cuts aren't really deep enough to cause bleeding or death, so I don't really see any reason to intervene. I don't think you would do that.
No. Maybe I didn't understand the full extent of the hypothetical, and I love hypotheticals, by the way. But I think for something extreme, you would need the consent of the person. But do I care morally if I was out in nature and there was no society where I thought a society is desirable with certain rules? If somebody had essentially, they weren't sentient, they were human and somehow alive but not sentient, and they had no care of the future and all. Yeah, I don't remember all the details of your thing. I wouldn't care about that human's life in nature.
Okay, now I have another hypotheticals because you like hypotheticals. This is the fun one. How do you define sentient?
Sentient, from my understanding, is defined as the ability to perceive or feel.
Okay,
not
so So if we created a smart home that could perceive and feel, that it mimicked the mechanism of our nervous system, and paired the mechanism of our nervous system with the thoughts, the data bank of thoughts and propositions about the what's happening, would you grant smart houses rights?
Yeah, so I've talked to a handful of people about AI. I don't have much information on AI, but in general, if something can feel, even if we created it to feel, and it can suffer, and therefore we are making it suffer, then I don't think we should make it suffer. But I personally would prefer not to answer anything involving AI, just because it becomes so complicated. Like, what if overnight somebody made so many things that it was getting in the way of us existing in a normal way, and therefore we had to harm these things?
Right, but the thing is, in the hypothetical, if all I'm doing is transferring what you're calling sentient for a human over to the machine, in this case it's a house. The reason I choose a house is that it's easy to do the trick of making it look like a human, but the point wouldn't be the shape, right? It wouldn't be the shape.
No,
It would be the sentience.
It'd be the sentience for sure.
Right. So that's why I choose a house. And let's say changing a light bulb wasn't going to harm, is actually going to help the house. But if you were to carry over your model, you would demand, in fact, you would punish people lawfully if they didn't get consent from the house to change the light bulb of the house.
Oh, gotcha. So because the house is sentient, every part that we are deeming house, therefore can't have physical interaction.
Yeah, it's assault.
I would call the problem making a house fit that category. I mean, so we can detect that humans that we can reason with, that if we don't want to be touched, it's probably best for all of us to not be touched. To create something that takes up space and to create a desire to not be touched, obviously, I think that's silly unless I can be convinced otherwise.
Well, what if it showed that someone younger who didn't realize it needed hugs and it was actually healthy for them, but they just were averse to it for some reason? They just didn't want a hug, but in the long run, it actually helped them. That physical contact
somebody younger created a sentient house to hug the house?
No, sorry. I was just taking the consent thing, right? Where there's always this example where you breach consent and the benefit is actually outweighs whatever the transgression is.
Oh, I see. Okay. So anything you could say involving a child, I wouldn't be able to go off of that. Can you talk about two adults?
Let's say an adult actually needed. What it was established that adults, old age, who they haven't seen family, they need physical touch, right?
Yeah.
But they don't want it, right? And it's actually not good for them, right?
Yeah.
And that
it is good for them, but they don't want it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's why usually I caveat the idea of physical touch by it being unwanted. If you're going on a date with somebody and you think they're flirting with you, but really they're not into you at all, and you touch their knee or something, I don't think you did a bad act. As soon as they say they don't want it, if you keep touching them, then we can call that harassment. And at some point, depending on your emotions, we'd call it stalking. The same thing would go for if somebody's in the middle of the street and a car is coming and they don't see it. You push them out of the way, but they don't not want you to push them out of the way, especially when it's all said and done. And so if somebody was going to go hug somebody and it would have been good for that person, but they don't want it. If they push you away and say, "Don't hug me," I don't think it's good to hug them just because it could be emotionally beneficial for them.
Got it. So based on all of that, how do you know a cow doesn't want to die?
If I thought a cow wanted to die, I would kill it and eat it because I miss beef.
No,
how do I know a cow?
Not that it would want to, but that it didn't want to. Like a want.
Yeah. No, I had a conversation with somebody about this. If you go to my videos and search by popularity, the third down is an hour and a half on this topic, and he convinced me to say that I would be accepting of a mentally challenged person being executed out in nature. But anyways, aside from that, talking about if an animal wants to... If I knew that animals had no want to live, no need, no care of the future, if they just existed and they dying would mean nothing to them, if their only actions of survival is instinct to stay alive based off how they evolved, and they don't care about any future, in my mind, if you could snap your fingers and they just are instantly dead, I almost don't care about that. Now, I have no way of knowing that, so I don't act upon that.
Right, but didn't you just kind of skip and frame it as if you have any reason to believe that's not the case? That a cow is thinking about some future it wants, that has true beliefs and false beliefs, that makes that apprehends the external world and makes evaluations and judgments and preferences about things.
Currently, I give it the benefit of the doubt that because it at least acts on its nature to
eyelashes.
Like run away.
I think you're being manipulated by eyelashes.
Well, let's see, and you could be right. Maybe you can convince me because I don't want to do anything because I think I need to prove my side right. I don't even know if I have a side. Most people are against what I say, but I want to think things over and I want to know what I think is true, and so. In this case, because of how animals react to certain situations, they don't want to be killed. They at very least don't want to be killed when something's trying to kill them.
No, hold on. This is begging the question. Again, the question before was, how do you determine reactivity to wants, right? And we didn't get anywhere with that. So when you look at a fish and it's flopping around, you kind of conceded that you're telling a story about suffering, but really if it was underwater, it would be swimming. It would be doing the same thing. It just doesn't have a line on it. When you look at a cow, what you're pointing to is reaction. So what I'm asking is, how do you determine the difference between a reaction to stimuli and a want? So even for a human, not to get dark, but if a human is deliberately jumps in the water with a brick that they tied to themselves, right?
Okay.
And it was over for them. And their bodies started going like this and freaking out and reacting to the water. If you look down, it wouldn't automatically be reasonable that they were wanting to live just because their body was reacting, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Like due to the fact that they clearly don't want to live, their body is just reacting in a certain way, and so I have to go off of what I know. I have to go off what I can see, and I can just because what you're describing, I could apply this to humans as well.
But we can communicate.
Well, what if we couldn't?
Well, but what if we couldn't? Right? Could you imagine a world? Then would we just be animals? If we couldn't communicate, then we wouldn't be really discussing this or asking. So it's kind of like it's like neither here nor there. It would be like, We're just animals then, right?
I had this example when I was discussing the idea of owning pets with somebody, that if we went into the rainforest and found this tribe, there's maybe 1,000 people, and they couldn't communicate, we couldn't reason with them in any way, but they were as playful as dogs. And we brought them to the U.S. and people could just have a pet human, and we could never teach them how to communicate in any way. And like, would it be reasonable to have these as pets? And we don't need to go into that, but looking at these humans that I'm describing now, since we can't reason with them, it might not be best to have them in our society because they might not accept our ideas of not killing each other. But we could look at them if we came across one out in nature and we were feeling hungry, but we were going to have food in a couple hours, but we could kill that human to eat it. We could recognize that even though we can't communicate with them, we can assume that they are more like most humans we know and less like the human that ties a brick to themselves and jump in the water.
Yeah, I understand that hypothetical, but I mean, from my view, I look at the human as a full category. So even the one who's incapable, in a similar way as you're describing it, they share the category of being human. So it's not that they're most likely to potentially have the capabilities we have, because we know for certain there are some humans that just don't. That's why I don't. When people do the what is it called? The name the trait. They always try to have you trapped in a property of nature or some sort of capability. If you remove the capability, then can you eat the human? I go for the whole category of human itself. But the question is still, for any given animal, what's the methodology of determining reactivity to stimuli and a want, which from a human perspective, a want and a desire, we might actually want things that are bad for us. We do it all the time, right? And so wanting is distinct, and a distinct evaluation from the reaction to something. So if I burn myself and my body reacts and I go, I didn't really like that, but there's a part of me that wants to feel it again for some stupid reason, right?
Okay.
And I can go against my reaction, right? This is the distinction with humans, is that we have mind, right? We have mind, which is this other metaphysical organ that sits atop the experience that evaluates those things, but we still have those things. But we're judging those things, or we're wanting more of those things, or but for the animal, the vegan, I haven't met one that can tell me where the distinction is and what methodology they use to determine the bridge between reactivity to stimuli and conscious, meaningful thought about the stimuli, which is different. Would you agree that's different?
I think so. My answer would just be go off what seems most reasonable by our ability to reason, and by comparing ourselves to fellow mammals and so on and so forth. But let me ask you a question that I think will at least get you on.
Hold on, I'll permit the question, but reasoning assumes this distinction between humans and animals, that we have mind to reason, right? That's what's in question, right?
Yeah.
You can say you don't have an answer. It's just that the question is really a dagger.
No, witnessing something that is somewhat like me, that seems somewhat like me, at least more so than a rock, and assuming that it might feel the same way I feel, that seems somewhere on the spectrum of reasonable to me.
No, but scientifically, that you're kind of describing empathy, and scientifically, empathy is actually a projection, and we're often wrong about that. But more importantly, is that we've already established, you've conceded that there's another human that's reacting to drowning, right? And it wouldn't be reasonable for you to assume, based on just their reaction, that they don't want to drown if they themselves did it to themselves, right?
Well,
just based on their body reaction.
The only situations where that would make sense whatsoever would be about suicidal animals, right? Is there any other case?
What do you mean? If I reacted to, again, another example is my willingness to participate in self-harm itself is not suicide. Any self-harm where I'm actually doing something willfully against the reactivity of my body.
Yeah.
I'm superseding my reactivity.
For sure,
Right.
self-harm, which is why a vegan out in nature that saw an animal trying to harm itself would probably just think it's weird, maybe film it. But let me ask you a question to see where you fall on the category you're talking about. If you were out in nature with a buddy and you just saw some random animal, let's just say a turtle, and turtle's a dumb example. Let's just say it was a zebra. You're in Africa. I think that I guess that there's zebras here in Oregon. But anyways, you're out in nature and you have a buddy and there's a zebra and he has a gun, and just for fun, he wants to shoot it in the head. He knows his shot will end its life instantly. No suffering or whatever. Do you find that? And he's not going to eat it. He's just going to leave it. What are your thoughts?
Okay, we're in the middle of nowhere. There's a zebra. The guy is going to kill it for fun, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to go, what are you doing? Are you going to eat it? And he says no.
Correct.
Okay. And there's no law.
Nope, no law. Nobody's going to know about it.
Yeah, I would skin the zebra and take whatever meat that I thought was good or not, if I had knowledge of the meat, and I would be like, you lost out.
Okay, so you're not in nature. He's in nature. He does this. He films it. He leaves it. You can't get to it. No other animals in nature are going to eat its carcass. It's just going to become dirt. Maybe very good nutritious compost. But aside from that, you're just aware that this took place. Do you think anything of it?
Yeah, I call him a retard.
Okay, yeah, no, fair enough, and something like that is why I give the benefit of the doubt to a little further extreme than you, but
Benefit of the doubt for what though? Exactly.
Well, I view the possibility of it having like a will to live, a will for the future, an ability to suffer, a mind. I view this to a level where I assume it to where I don't want to get in the way of those actions.
Okay, so
the action
now,
of continuing.
But here's the thing: if there's species of animals that it's in their nature to sort of die off or something, if there's like a part of the species that just dies off, like it just knows how to do it, and it has no benefit, right? There's no will or want to, or no will to not want to. It's just doing. My question is, so everything you said is like, you're saying that, well, I'm just going to assume that there's animal will. I'm asking whether it's reasonable to assume that and what it's based on. Now, I think it would need to be based on a distinction between reactivity to stimuli and conscious thought about the stimuli. And the will would be, at least from my perspective, will means that you have mind to pursue something, including pursuing something that doesn't actually benefit you, like your body or your survival necessarily, that you can supersede things like that. But I don't see any actual reason to assume such a thing for animals, because I think it's reasonable to ask, how do you draw the line between reactivity to stimuli and conscious will? That means you can overcome something. Will means you can overcome your reaction to stimuli.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I don't know if animals can or which ones can.
But you
which
just
is
grant
why.
it.
Well, I grant it personally for myself. As far as like legally or what I think others should do, there's a reason I've been having conversations with people about this, and it's pissing off a lot of vegans. But it's because I care way more about the suffering than I do about this life ending, because I'm not thoroughly convinced of what you're trying to convince me to not think. I'm essentially.
I'm not. Hold on. I'm not trying to convince you. I'm actually poking at what your method of knowledge is, because suffering. You just used the term suffering. Now, suffering would still be in the same category of how do you distinguish reactivity to stimuli and suffering? Because suffering assumes this mind again that's going, I'm suffering. We do that. We go, I'm really suffering. How about women who have uncontrollable orgasms all day? That's a real phenomenon. You know that?
I've heard of this. Yeah.
So it's not. They're not They're not being burned. They're not, So
again,
so this is suddenly a mind suddenly looks at this situation and goes, "This is suffering for me." They can communicate why it is. It's not conducive to a life. They can't develop relationships with people. There's some other part of being a human that it gets in the way of that's not reduced to physicality. And I think the problem with vegans, and it's still a problem with your view, is that you haven't established this difference, but it's required. That even the term suffering is required to make this distinction of reactivity to stimuli and conscious evaluation of experience.
I think you agree with me more than I even agree with me. One thing as a reaction to what you just said is if I get stabbed and I know what that feels like, and then a human that can't communicate with me gets stabbed and I can witness what that looks like, and then any other mammal gets stabbed, I'm going to just assume this thing personally. I'm not putting it into law. I'm just assuming this thing. And if I get convinced otherwise, I get convinced otherwise. But while I'm convinced of what I just described, it's the reason why I would also not be a fan of my friend that shot the zebra for no reason. And so that's why I made the claim that I think you agree with me more than I agree with me.
Do you want to respond to this vegan for me?
Sorry, what's
maybe
that?
Why don't you? I want to see if you can steel man my position based by answering this vegan's question.
Let's see. Reactivity to stimuli matters. Why? Well, I mean, something just reacting to something without getting anything, like without it meaning anything, means nothing. Right? Like if like the fish thing. If a fish has zero care if it's alive, if you could talk to it and you could enhance its brain only to a level to communicate and no other enhancement, and it couldn't tell you it has any interest in continuing, and if you could know for sure that it's only moving because of reactivity to stimuli, and we know it is not feeling anything we would describe as suffering or pain, there's no reason to have any moral consideration for it because it is not sentient. Which is so. Anyways,
and like the old man situation, if I went to all of the farms and there was this, I don't know if you caught the early part of the stream, if there was this, DMT for cows, this kind of scenario where the drug not only enhances the cow's experience into some orgiastic, burning cow in the sky event before they were killed and eaten, but they felt nothing. There was no evaluation of dying. It was just the most blissful Burning Man event for cows ever, and it just happened to be the end of their life, and they weren't aware it was the end of their life. It was just like going into the bright light, right? And so suddenly you remove this thing you're calling suffering or pain, which I've established aren't identical. Pain and suffering are not identical. If you remove either, both, suddenly it's totally fine to farm animals, right?
Farm's tricky. So here's with the pain. Okay.
No pain, no suffering.
So here's kind of my stance. I tell people they should go hunting. If they're going to eat animals, because I don't feel like we've had enough time of studies to know for sure that all humans will be fine without all animal products. And so if you're going to kill animals, I'd rather you go hunting because that deer has lived its life out in nature, and then hopefully it dies quickly. Be a good shot. And if we were going to extend that to, say, cows, I would want us to have areas that are, even if it's man-made, it's some form of nature where it's not really fenced in any kind of a way other than borders of a forest.
Do they not want to be fenced in?
That's the thing. I think it's reasonable to think, first of all, that nothing wants to be fenced in. But if you could have an area that has no fence and you can track where something goes, and if it ever extends past where that fence would be, then I would say the force of that fence is probably not good.
But the same question applies. How do you know reactivity to the external world versus conscious evaluation? For instance, if I'm put in an MRI machine and I have a reaction to it, claustrophobia, but but it doesn't mean I want to get out because I want to get the results. But my body is telling me to get out, even though I can supersede, take over. I can take over, override the reaction.
Yeah.
And I think
that's
this is where mind gets interesting and why humans can demonstrate and communicate such things, that we can override pain, we can override pleasure, we can override our impulses. And that's key to actually what you're talking about, is having a foundational society that abides by laws and reciprocal behavior and ethics, is that that we can overcome our impulses. That's what we want from each other and ourselves. I'm saying for any vegan to argue their position for animals so far that I've heard, I haven't heard any good arguments for veganism. They would require applying or assuming. Now, you admittedly assume it, but I think at least after this conversation, you might be like, you know what? It might be important for me to find where that is, because if I can't distinguish reactivity to mind, I can't assume wants and wills and desires of animals. And if I did assume it, where would I draw the line? Is it a crab? You know, do I go to a weasel? Like, at what point? And I asked, Vegan Gains this, and he didn't even blink. He was like, yeah, crabs have very, subjective experiences. That's assumed like there's like a crab, there's like a being of crabness. Like there's an ontological status that's metaphysical about crabness. And you're like, I'm a crab. Like, oh, I'm so tired of this. Like, whatever it is, there's this like internal monologue, so to speak, as opposed to just reaction.
Yeah,
Right?
I think that's the difference between us and other animals. My guess is that, yes, we have the ability to override it, which is why we have our intuition and then we have our reasoning, where most animals, I'm guessing, just have the intuition. And so I think that's an important factor. And when you factor that in, I think I likely do not care about their lives being ended, but with the possibility that I'm wrong about that, I at very least want their lives to be ended with reason, which is why you wouldn't want purpose. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
You wouldn't. Well, either way, if you have
utility.
If you have a reason to kill it, if you need to kill it to eat or whatever, which is, I believe, why you would be bothered by your friend killing the zebra for no reason.
But
now, we could assume that there's.
Hold on. Is one little thing at a time.
Yeah.
If my friend's reason is that it makes him feel good, I don't think on your model you'd have any argument against it. You'd just be like, I personally don't like the reason, but there is a reason.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no. I mean, pretty much anything can be a reason. If I was convinced that the life means nothing, that they have that they are only acting on instinct, and I decided I don't care about the life of something acting on instinct, then I wouldn't care if the reason was just pleasure. That's fine. As long as we could magically know it was an instant death, which I think is another concern. But in a hypothetical where it's a Thanos snap of the fingers, and then it, like, your friend got so much joy from that. I mean, who cares? By all means.
So the measure that you evaluate, the moral consideration of any given action, human to human animal, is coincidentally is a mind evaluating. That's something that transcends instinct. Because if we were all instinctual, none of us would have an argument against any behavior, right? We couldn't be blamed for a rape or a murder if we established it was instinct.
Yeah.
Just pure, like we were just in reactivity mode, like constantly. I couldn't help it. This is why I reject determinism, because this is the consequences that not only you don't have knowledge, but all of the behavior, right? An evolutionary position on it is that all of the behavior is all inclusive in one big process that goes beyond any comprehension of that our singular mind has. And so you're just doing, right? I just ate the steak. I just killed the animal. I just killed the man. It would just be this continuation of reactivity to stimuli, and we couldn't be blamed, right? Because even the moment we go, that really wasn't right, the guy who's being blamed goes, you're just reacting to stimuli right now. And we would reject that, right? It's absurd. We wouldn't teach our kids that.
Yeah.
We wouldn't teach our kids, you know what, honey? You're just a bundle of chemicals reacting to stimuli, but at least pretend that you're not.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have a dog?
No.
Okay. Let's imagine you had a dog and you like it. Would you say that if somebody kicked your dog in the face and it whimpered, would you feel comfortable assuming that it felt pain or suffering, considering that you separate those two, which maybe is reasonable for you to do? But
I would assume it reacted to the foot and that in some form of pain. I couldn't assume what kind of pain it has because again, our evaluation of pain is not just the feel, but the judgment about the pain. I wouldn't assume that the dog has a judgment about the pain. I would assume there's a reaction, but on a personal level, I would say, don't. You're actually attacking my property. Like, don't.
Yeah,
do
but do you care about, like, if it doesn't leave any mark or emotional scarring? Do you care about the property that it attacked?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, if it's going to damage, if it's a possibility to damage it, which I'm going to assume, right? If you're because of the act of hitting,
let's assume there's no damage.
There's no damage to the dog.
Like there is just the pain. There's the possible pain it's feeling. Is that reasonable enough for you to go, I don't know if it's feeling pain or if it's just reacting like a fish on a hook, but it might feel pain, and I would like this dog.
I would say don't touch my shit, dude. And then I would say I have an illusory emotional connection to the dog as if it has some sort of like character to it.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's just call it a stray dog for fun then. So we won't call it your shit. We just know it's a dog that exists that can whimper. Mm-hmm. It's not trying to be a gotcha or whatever. I'm just trying to see exactly how you feel about the stimuli part. It makes sense to me to extend the assumption that that this unwanted pain isn't just a natural reaction to keep the species alive through evolution. That again, it also is feeling it.
I can't grant unwanted because it assumes this mind that wants.
Well, I don't mean wants or unwanted using reasoning. I just mean that in that moment, that thing that is living would prefer that not to be happening.
Right. I wouldn't argue that position. At most, I would go to evaluating the person kicking it and whether or not that's kind of an act against themselves at some level, emotionally, psychologically, that it's them who I'm concerned with, not the dog.
Okay. But are you also concerned with dogs? So let's say there's a guy that got a lot of pleasure from tying a dog up by its legs, hanging down from a thing, and it took a knife and it just like stabbed it a whole bunch, but it knew how to stab it to keep it alive, and it would be bleeding, it would be whimpering, and it did this every day, kept it alive for months and months and months. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we're concerned about the guy, and he seems like a mentally insane and he might hurt people, but just the dog alone, should there not be a law whatsoever about torturing a dog? Do you not view torture of an animal?
If there was a law about against torturing, it would, from my perspective, it would be a law, the same law against suicide, that it's self-harm. I would consider that
really? And that's
act against the person. That's an act against the person.
And if it was your own dog, it's only because it's your property. That's wild. I feel like that's wild, but maybe I just don't know.
It's not wild because the alternative is just transposing what we value with humans and putting it onto the dog anyway. So it's in a
reasonable sense, yeah.
It's just human centric either way. So it's not like we're making some big jump. It's just like, oh, it's the same. It's the same thing with the giraffe eyes, right? The giraffe eyes. They're look at the giraffe eyes. He looks like Prince, right? He looks like giraffe.
It's assuming that this animal might suffer in a way that we can view that if the most benefit we will get from it is just the joy of enjoying making something suffer, and the furthest possibility of what this animal can feel is this strong level of suffering, we can just look at it and go, our individual subjective morality says that it's more reasonable to not risk it being a situation where there's all this pain when the only benefit is not eating animal flesh, it's just making an animal suffer. Talking about a dog we're not going to eat.
No.
I think that's reasonable for a law.
No, it's not reasonable to assume this concept of suffering. Again, pain is signal based. Suffering is evaluation of pain. Because there are people who can overcome pain, and they're not suffering, but they're in pain. So if that's possible, we couldn't just transfer this concept of suffering onto animals because we don't even know if an animal can overcome its pain somehow, right? So we don't know that. So again, it ends up being about the human itself that's doing stuff, right? Not about the animal. Because otherwise, if you own a bunch of dogs, right, and someone comes and goes, dude, I heard a dog yelping, and I came over, and you're stabbing it in this very peculiar way. What's going on? And you go, dude, don't worry. I actually have this really enhanced pharmaceutical that actually not only makes it painless, but the dog is actually, he's laughing. He's laughing when I'm doing this.
Yeah, hypotheticals can make it possible to excuse something, but I think that in this case, what I'm referring to is reasonable. And we have to assume things. For example, we have to assume things when we decide that 18, 17, or 16 is an age to call somebody a human, an adult, versus 12. We have to look at something, and we can't know for sure, but we have to look at it and assume based off what we can assume out of an average intelligence and so on.
Well, I'll just say that it's not creating a hypothetical to excuse. It's creating a hypothetical to establish that the reasoning, if it were to change, wouldn't actually be the reason not to do it. Because it's not actually unrealistic to sedate a dog and then beat it not to death. Right? Hang it, and then poke at it and prod at it, and it's not feeling pain, it's not feeling suffering. It's not even an unrealistic hypothetical. It's totally doable. It's just that, from my perspective, the same example of the man that you would have no problem stabbing if it just didn't mean he was going to die and he didn't feel it. Well, who cares? I see it. This is about human dignity. That means that we can violate our humanity, act against ourselves, and we can act against the fellow man, regardless of whether the transmission of pain and receptors is happening. That there's something else that's being violated from my perspective. That's why it couldn't really be about the dog. Now, there might be a Christian ethic that can extend to how we care properly for animals and how to properly consume them and this kind of stuff. But again, that would still be about the human managing its own self and its own virtues and its own obedience to God, in a sense. So it still wouldn't be about the dog or trying to equalize or attempt to equalize in any way the beast and the man. It's about the man leveling up his own virtues and dignity and behaviors. And would that benefit potentially the animal? It could. It does, actually. Like, I would say that ironically, farming, as well as animal husbandry, has actually benefited those animals more than letting them out into the wild and getting half. You've seen those videos of totally skinned zebra still walking around without an arm, and not that I husband zebras. It's just that you leave the animal to nature. Nature is brutal. Man defies nature. Not ultimately. We can't undermine the laws, and nature eventually does consume us. But we can defy it to some extent. We kind of manipulate it. We build in it and around it. We harness it, and because humans harness, and a key word, what's the word that's always used by vegans? Stop exploiting. Exploiting means harness, right? So it's like, stop exploiting natural gas. Stop exploiting. You're like, stop harnessing? Like, I don't understand. Why? Why stop harnessing animals for your wants, needs, for your life, for your sustainability, for your nutrients? Why? And the vegan doesn't say why. You don't say why. And again, you're sort of like outcast vegan. I mean, you should watch it. I mean, you're enemy number one. I got to start wrapping this up.
For sure.
Reasonable, but great conversation. And is there anything else you want to say? Just last words for you, and then.
No, I mean, I'd love to come on and talk further. I have ideas on what we would do if the world went vegan, what we'd do with farm animals.
Hold on. What? Oh yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I have a handful of different ideas. But yeah, maybe I'll check out your live streams in the future and hop on here again. I guess I would tell people if they want to come check out my channel, Reasonable Vegan, come check out the debate I did with Vegan Gains. And also, I think it's good to check things out and keep the conversations going. Who knows? Maybe I will be convinced. I think you made really good points, and I enjoyed the session. So.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. And again, if you want to do more debates that's off your channel, that's more designated, you can go over to the Crucible or the Crucible Limited. There's really good debates. If you haven't heard of them over there, give them a follow. And Andrew over there, he's always looking for reasonable vegans, actually, vegans that actually sort of engage this way. It doesn't always go this way, as you probably know.
Yeah.
So yeah, you would be a really good fit over there, even as like sort of like the resident vegan. So definitely check that out. And Andrew, if you're listening, check out Reasonable Vegan and get him in the queue for a debate.
All right, sounds good. Take care, man.
Thanks a lot, man. See ya.